Hello, this is Trevor Scott Barton, reading from my story Hilcius, Chapter 10. They sat in the single windowless examination room at the free medical clinic on Johns Island. Hilcius studied the yellowing eye chart on the back of the closed door of the room and practiced saying the letters in his mind, from Spanish to English, and then from English back to Spanish, until he could think them into a seamless line and know he knew them without even having to think. His mommy flipped through the pages of an old Life magazine with an immigrant mother and child on the cover. His abuelo studied a watercolor painting on the wall of a heavy-laden peach tree, the colors of the ripe peaches glowing brightly against the white walls of the room, and then clasped his hands in his lap and looked thoughtfully into them as if he were looking into the deepest parts of the earth. There was a tap on the door. Dr. Maria walked into the room. "Buenos dias, amigos," she said. "¿Cómo estás?" She had eyes like his abuelo, earthy brown and deep, and he trusted her. She wore her white doctor's coat, faded blue jeans, and old black Chuck Taylor Converse high tops. "Well," she began, "let's talk about Hilcius." I looked over his brain scans and studied them very carefully. I didn't find any organic reason as to why he doesn't talk. The test on his ears, nose, and throat came back normal. So all of the parts of us that help us talk are well and good inside of him. His mommy wrapped her arm around his shoulder and held him close to her. She breathed out a slow, quiet sigh of relief. But we still haven't answered our essential question. Why doesn't Hilcius talk? She pulled up a chair in front of him, sat down in it, and leaned her face close to his face until her nose gently touched his nose and her eyes looked deeply into his eyes. "So now we've got to walk together down a path into places we've never been, places we don't know," she smiled. "The only person who can tell us why he's not talking is not talking." He smiled back at her, then looked away from her and down at his feet. Suddenly he whistled the most beautiful notes Dr. Maria had ever heard in her life. They reminded her of the happiness she felt as a little girl standing in the fields with her family on their farm in El Salvador, and at the same time they reminded her of the sadness she felt as she worked day after day to help migrant after migrant who was just trying to make a life in a place where it was hard to live. The music brought a stillness and a quietness to the room. After a moment, his abuelo spoke. "He says he does talk, but he talks in ways few people understand. At least that's what I think he is saying." And it was true. As the family got up to go to the old gutted-out school bus in which they slept, Dr. Maria said, "Oh, Hilcius, I almost forgot. I have something for you." She pulled out a book from her doctor's bag and handed it to him. It was the Princeton Field Guide to Whales and Dolphins. There was a blue whale on the cover. He opened the book to the page about blue whales and stared at it. It was hard for him to read the words because his eyes teared up for her kindness. He whistled, "Gracias, muchas gracias." Dr. Maria walked with them down the dusty path back to their bus. Workers filed out of the fields and orchards. Some carried sacks full of tomatoes, some carried sacks full of peaches. The women entered the yards around their trailers and shacks and began cooking beans and tortillas. Miss Smith came by and passed around cups of sweet tea to everyone. The men stood in small groups under the shade of the giant magnolia trees and drank their tea. The women took their babies off their backs. The old abuelas swayed them on their laps and made them coo and smile. Dr. Maria sat near the door of the bus with Hilcius. Days have ended like this for migrant workers on the Smith farm for as long as I've been at the clinic, she said. All of the workers gather together, the women cook until everyone is fed, everyone talks, laughs, cries, sings, and dances. Most of the migrants lived in dilapidated trailers and sharecropper shacks left over from the days of Jim Crow in the South. At least your bus has open windows and doors that let in the coastal breeze, said Dr. Maria. No matter where they lived, the migrants had this kind of community meal every night, and everyone was invited to come. This was the kind of kindness they shared with each other and to the world. But it was a kind of kindness that the world often didn't share back with them.